Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Circuit Court Jury Service. I'm Jim Gass, and on behalf of my fellow circuit judges and myself, I want to welcome you to serving your community and coming to serve in circuit court as a potential juror. You may ask yourself, how did I come to be here in circuit court on this list? Your name is randomly drawn from a database to serve your community and your county. What we will do here in the next few minutes is do our very best to explain what jury service is all about and try to answer some of the questions you may have in your mind about how often you will have to serve and what your duties will be. Let me say this, some of you may have already served as jurors in the past here in Jefferson County. And if you have within the last 2 years, you are not required to serve. You are ineligible to serve on a jury panel at this time. And I ask you, if that's the case, to let Kevin Poe, your circuit court clerk, know that, and arrangements will be made where you do not have to appear and serve this term. Others who are on the potential juror list are asking themselves, how will this interrupt my life? What if I am sick? What if I'm caring for a sick relative? And certainly in this time where many people are sick and others and they are depending on the care of others, those are very valid questions. They will be dealt with on an individual basis. And if you will contact Kevin Poe as well about those issues, we will do our very best to get you an answer about your service. Let me say this for those of you who have never served as a juror. This is a vital component to our judicial system and to the safety of your community. In my opinion, other than voting, jury service is one of the most important roles a citizen can take in serving their community, their state, and their country. Let me begin by saying that if you serve as a juror in this case, you're not going to be asked to serve every day. Quite frankly, most cases are resolved before they ever get to the trial level where a jury is needed. And even if a jury is scheduled, sometimes those cases settle after they're scheduled before you arrive. I know it's the practice in my court, and I believe it's the practice in the other circuit judges' courts, that in criminal cases, pleas will be dealt with ahead of time, not once the jury arrives. That way, you in our community will not needlessly come to work and be asked to leave without doing anything. We appreciate your time and we appreciate your attention. Let me begin by saying that there are two types of cases you will be asked to serve on if you're chosen as a juror in this case. One is a civil case where disputes are made and resolved about contracts and civil issues, such as where damages are determined, such as car wrecks or injuries that might be someone's fault but are not criminal in nature, where money is the measure of a remedy. In those type cases, jurors serve to make a decision, as they do in all cases. And you will be asked to reach a decision and reach a unanimous verdict. That means all of you agreeing. There will be 12 jurors, and all will be asked to work together and unanimously decide on an award or no award and what amount an award is given if one is chosen. The other type case is a criminal case. You will be asked in those cases to decide whether a person accused of a crime is guilty of that crime or not guilty of that crime. Let me also tell you that if you are in this panel, 12 of you will be chosen to serve in addition to a foreman for a 13-person grand jury. Let me begin by talking about that grand jury service. But before I do, let me say, if you come and serve as a potential juror, this court, as all courts in Tennessee are now doing, will require and ensure to you as a citizen that social distancing is in place for your personal safety and the safety of others. We also require, by order of our Supreme Court, that each person who comes for jury service or to testify at trial or will interact with the jury will be wearing a mask. And if you don't have a mask, one will be provided for you. This is all for your safety and the safety of those around you. I stopped a moment ago when I talked about coming for grand jury service. 13 of you will be able to serve as grand jurors. Let me begin by telling you what the role of a grand jury is. And then I'll explain in more depth what your role as a juror will be at a trial. Grand jurors, as I said, 13 at a time, are a constitutional office, just like that of the district attorney and the judge. It's a very important role. The grand jury will decide what cases are formally charged to be sent into circuit court for determination by trial upon the state's prosecution. How does a case get to the grand jury? Normally a case comes to the grand jury after an officer or a law enforcement entity or department arrests someone or charges someone with a crime. They then appear in this county in front of Judge Roach in General Sessions Court. And if they're charged with a felony or a misdemeanor, Judge Roach will determine if there's probable cause for that charge to exist. The state district attorney's office will prosecute that charge. He will have a preliminary hearing. At that preliminary hearing, he will either find no probable cause that the charge should exist against the person, or he will find probable cause. And if he does that, that case will be bound over to the grand jury on which you may serve. At the grand jury proceeding, the district attorney general will present witnesses. The grand jury works in a closed proceeding. The proceedings of the grand jury are secret. No one in the community may ask you questions about cases that you may have heard during the grand jury proceeding. And if they persist in asking you, please report that to the court. The grand jury will hear those witnesses and may ask for the assistance of the district attorney general's office to point out questions to be asked, although at the grand jury, the grand jurors may ask questions of witnesses. And once the evidence on behalf of the prosecution is heard by the grand jury, a decision will be made as to whether or not there is, additionally, probable cause for that case to be sent on to circuit court for trial in a criminal case. Now, the wonderful thing about a grand jury proceeding is that the grand jurors themselves have the absolute right to ask questions of the witness. Unlike at a trial where most or all the questions are asked by the lawyers involved in the case, maybe the judge will ask a question. At the grand jury, the grand jurors are the investigators as well and may ask questions of any witness that testifies before them. And they then will vote. If you're on the grand jury, it requires 12 of the 13 to vote to find probable cause to send that charge on to trial in circuit court. If you're on the grand jury, the district attorney's office, maybe the district attorney or his designated assistant will talk to you that day of service about what to expect and remind you again about some of these things that I've just told you. When those cases are sent to circuit court, in criminal cases, they're called being bound over from the grand jury to the circuit court with a true bill. If there's not enough information or evidence submitted to the grand jury to justify that case going forward, the grand jury foreman will write no true bill on the back of the indictment, and the case prosecution ends at that point. If the vote is 12 out of the 13, at least 12 out of the 13 to send it to circuit court, the grand jury foreman will write true bill and sign his name on every indictment, in addition to signing where the witnesses were sworn and dating it. Another instrument is called a presentment at the grand jury. That's where the grand jurors themselves may have information of a crime, or there's never been an arrest warrant issued by an arresting agency. But rather, for instance, there's information about criminal activity that an agency has. Many times it may be a drug ring or a drug operation, and that has over a period of time been investigated. Those cases may come directly to the grand jury, not upon a warrant, and bypassing the General Sessions Court. If those charges appear before you, whatever your vote may be, true bill or no true bill, all 13 grand jurors will sign the jacket of that presentment when it's either true billed or no true billed, and if true billed, sent to the circuit court. Let me talk about what happens in circuit court in criminal cases. Once a formal charge comes out of the grand jury, the accused is then arraigned in circuit court before one of the circuit judges. In this county, most of the criminal cases are handled by Judge Sloan. In Cott County, Judge Moore, Carter Moore, handles most of the criminal cases. In Sevier County, Judge Rex Henry Ogle and myself handle most of the criminal cases, and Judge Sloan and I handle the criminal cases in Granger County. But once a case comes in Jefferson County before, as in all the other counties, before a circuit judge, these charges are addressed formally in open court to the accused. If the person has a lawyer, it's noted on the record. If the person cannot afford a lawyer, one is appointed to represent them. The process then begins where the state and the lawyers exchange discovery. Motions are filed about questions of law, which are then decided at an appropriate time by the circuit judge. But most importantly, your role as a juror comes at the conclusion of all those legal proceedings when the case is set for trial. What you will be asked to do at trial in a criminal case is to determine if the state meets its burden of proof and proves beyond a reasonable doubt that an accused is guilty of the crime they are charged with. At that trial, if you're a trial juror, a whole panel of people will be selected, and they will be called and summoned, rather. And from that panel, 12 citizens will be selected. You may be asked questions as a potential juror on your day of service. Let me assure you that I will not allow, nor will any of my fellow judges allow, inappropriate questions to be asked of you as a potential juror. This is not like it's sometimes on TV. You're here to serve your community and state, and only a question that is appropriate and relevant to the issues to be tried will be allowed to be asked. But it is important that each prospective juror that is selected to come and potentially be a juror by sitting in the jury box are asked questions and allowed to be asked questions relevant to the issues. For instance, do you know anybody involved in the case? Do you know anything or had any similar experiences in your life or a life of your family or friend that might be similar to these charges or the victim's role in any aspect of the case that might be similar to what the state will present? Once those questions are determined, the lawyers are then allowed to challenge jurors, and that is done at the bench by the lawyers under a closed communication to the court. Lawyers are given peremptory challenges, and they are allowed to exclude someone from jury service for any reason or no reason at all. They're limited to the number of challenges they get to do that, but they are allowed to do that. And the reason for it is each lawyer is allowed to make a calculated estimate as to which citizens will be the very best citizens to serve on a jury. So if you're asked to come and then not chosen, please do not feel offended. Each case is different. Each lawyer is different. It's simply part of the process that our system goes through to make sure that both the state and an accused have the very fairest trial that they can possibly get. Again, once a jury is chosen, you will hear opening statements from the lawyers about what the case is all about. Then the witnesses will be sworn, and you will hear sworn testimony from witnesses coming from the witness stand. Now, there may be objections that are made by one side or the other that the judge in the case will have to decide and apply the law to. There may be conferences at the bench where the judge considers matters outside your hearing or earshot of you. To speed things along, many times those are conducted at the bench so that you're not excluded from the courtroom and that time is wasted and taken bringing you in and out while these legal discussions occur. Sometimes it may be necessary, if you're a juror, to be excluded from the courtroom as a group during the process of a trial. But those are only meant to make sure your service as a juror is as fair as it can be, and that the appropriate and admissible evidence is brought to you for your consideration in accordance with the law. We appreciate your time. All of the judges in this district want you to be here for the shortest period of time for service that can occur. Once the evidence is in a case, the lawyers will argue their case, tell you what their position in the case is, and remind you about evidence that you've heard from the witness stand that's been sworn to in reaching your verdict. But ultimately, the law in this state that you will consider is given to you by the judge, and that's the law you will follow. You will then, after a written instruction of the law is read to you by the judge, you will be given that instruction and any exhibits in the case, and you as a group will deliberate to the jury room. You will among yourselves select a foreperson to serve as your spokesman, and you will begin your deliberations. Let me tell you and remind you now, although your trial judge more likely than not will tell you at the start of a trial, that during the trial, there may be times that you will be outside the courtroom. You may be taken to lunch, excluded from the courtroom during recesses. And during those times, even after you started hearing evidence, you will not be able to talk to one another about the facts of the case that you've heard so far. You will not deliberate on the case at any point in time while you're waiting for the trial to conclude or during the middle of the trial. You may talk about your children, your grandchildren, the weather, anything else but the testimony and facts going on in the case. The time for doing so is after the judge charges you with the law and asks you to deliberate on the case. At that point in time, you as a group will work together, talk about the law, talk about the facts, the witnesses that you've heard, and make a decision. Reminding you again that your decision must be unanimous for you to reach a verdict, either guilty or not guilty. Sometimes jurors in their service feel very strongly and cannot reach a unanimous verdict. If that is the case, that will be a hung jury. In those rare situations where there is a hung jury, the court will declare a mistrial out of necessity. And if a mistrial is declared, the state will try the case or may try the case at a later time in front of a different jury on the same charges. Let me talk to you now about civil cases. I spoke a moment ago about money damages and the right to recover those or not to recover those in civil court. I told you in a criminal case that the burden of proof is always on the state of Tennessee. Let me tell you, in a criminal case, the defendant never has to testify in a criminal case. That's the accused's constitutional right. They may choose to, but they may choose not to. And that should never be considered by you as a juror if someone chooses not to testify if they are accused. It's the same right that each of us have as citizens of this country and this state. In a civil case, the rules are different. Where in a criminal case, the burden is on the state of Tennessee to show beyond a reasonable doubt that an accused is guilty. In a civil case, It is by preponderance of the evidence. And the simple and easiest way I can explain that is if you have a set of scales. In a civil case, for damages, for money, you put the weight of the evidence on each side and see if it is any longer equal. If it weighs more in favor of one party than the other, that's the simplest explanation I can say is a preponderance of the evidence. Where if those same scales were used to look at a criminal case, the weight must be heavily on one side before an accused can be found guilty of a crime. And let me say this, in criminal cases where an accused stands trial for their liberty, that burden always being on the state, the weight of evidence must be mighty because the accused liberty is at stake. I have talked to you today about many things concerning your service as a juror. Let me add to those things by saying the reason we are utilizing this platform with a video instruction is to lessen the number of people that may be located in the courtroom when one of our judges orients those who have not seen this video. Traditionally, we would do this all live. But because of social distancing, we as your judges believe it's much easier, if you choose to see this in the comfort of your own home. That will lessen the number of people that are required to sit in the courtroom and hear this again. In addition to that, you will be asked to take an oath to serve faithfully and truly, and to answer questions, and to follow the law as a potential juror for trial service. If you're chosen to serve on the grand jury, in addition to the oath as a regular juror, you will also take an oath to serve on the grand jury to investigate cases. And for you to serve as a qualified juror, you must be 18 years of age and a resident of Tennessee and a resident of Jefferson County for the last 12 months. You must also be of sound mind and have not had a disqualifying conviction for a felony or other infamous crime. If you have had in your past a felony conviction, please contact the clerk and he will be happy to explain further after he gains that information. It has been a pleasure talking to you and communicating with you about one aspect that makes this the greatest country in the world. And that is that justice is determined by the citizens of our country. That sets us apart from so many. It's my privilege to serve you as your circuit judge, as it's the privilege of my fellow judges to serve you. If you have questions about your service and you are before the court, you ask those questions. We'll be happy to get you an answer. Thank you for your time in watching this video. We look forward to seeing you in serving Jefferson County. Thank you.